member of Cole Harbour, MLA for Cole Harbour, stands up and says, fair is fair, let's get rid of the corporation funding, let's get rid of the unions, and let's finally address those monies. And Mr. Speaker, you know, to my honourable colleagues in the Liberal caucus, maybe some of them don't know where the money's at. But we know that it's been invested, we know that it's been used in recent campaigns. And you know, we can ask ourselves, each and every one of us, what will we do? You know, the former Tory governments have said, give it back to the government. Let the government decide. And we can throw it towards the debt. We can throw it to the food banks. We can help with small options homes, Mr. Speaker. Those questions, those concerns for Nova Scotians, if we don't allow them to speak on this proposed legislation, Bill 117, in the next 6 months, those questions are going to go unanswered. Only in the sense, Mr. Speaker, that we won't hear it, but we'll read about it, and we'll hear it on the radio, and we'll hear it in the media, Mr. Speaker. That's not long enough. 5 minutes is not long enough.
6 months is long enough.
We cannot miss the opportunity to hear the concerns. And again, I'm going to go back to the Liberal, the potential, and I'm not going to name names or constituencies, Mr. Speaker, but the Liberal caucus and those members that are seeking possible leadership.
Liberals got to have a leader to have this decided. We should wait 6 months.
Well, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. There's a renowned, astounding observation. You know, in 6 months' time, the Liberals will indeed have a leader that will have to answer, and I say have to answer.
I'm going to cry in a minute.
And I don't want my honourable colleague to start crying, but I think it's a wonderful idea. We have an interim leader who has consistently spoken out on the unions. We've addressed it, Mr. Speaker. Our leader has come out and said, no more. We'll get the funding. We'll go door to door. We'll go to the grassroots, Mr. Speaker. We'll talk to Nova Scotians. We'll take the $5 and $10 donations, Mr. Speaker. But the Liberal caucus has an opportunity now, after, and I'm not going to well up, Mr. Speaker. I refuse to well up. The Liberal caucus, and for those members going forth in the possible leadership, they have a wonderful opportunity now to stand up and tell Nova Scotians, who they will potentially ask, and yes, I see some of the proposed leaders, and I believe that they are going to take their place, Mr. Speaker, in the coming days to speak on this. Because I can only put myself, as my parents always said, don't judge someone until you walk a mile in their shoes. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take a second to walk a mile in those individuals that may choose to run for the Liberal leadership. And I'm going to stand here today and say, I've got a clean conscience. I want to be honest and address this issue. Because if I don't address it now, Mr. Speaker, it's going to bite me in the butt later on. Take the time in the next 6 months to talk to Nova Scotians. Take the time in the next 6 months to sit and tell Nova Scotians that their opinions are valued by each and every MLA that sits in this House. One end of the province to the other, Mr. Speaker. We give them the opportunity. What are we telling them? We are telling them that this is important for not only now, but our future. The future of politics, the future governments that are going to sit on that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We all want no questions asked. And the only way to do that is to tighten this legislation. Tighten this legislation, address the issues of the past, and we can do so by supporting this amendment, Mr. Speaker. We can do that by adding into this legislation to eliminate, and I'll say it again, a bold initiative taken by the Liberal, or the leader of the official opposition, a bold step in stating equal playing field, level playing field. Start at zero, and we can go forward. Everyone gets to start at that starting point, Mr. Speaker. Eliminate funding and campaign donations from corporations. Eliminate, and I'll say it again.
Bring us home.
Eliminate union campaign donations, Mr. Speaker. That is a bold initiative taken by this party in the coming days and in the past days. And, Mr. Speaker, if this government honestly believes,
6 months to do away with lawn signs.
absolutely, let's be environmentally friendly. Let's follow Ontario,
Minister of Energy
right?
wants to do away with lawn signs.
because we are,
Stand up and give us
it's
an
not
hour.
a popularity contest. We're here to serve the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and that means by serving them, we also listen to them. And we have to, on such a crucial piece of legislation. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I honestly believe, again, and I'll stand here in my place and state it, I believe if this was such an important piece of legislation, it should not be rushed through. It should have been brought forth earlier to
Order,
hold a
please.
debate.
The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start off this evening by relating a couple stories which I think are relevant to Bill 117 and where we're going or where we're not going with this bill. In 2003, after the election in 2003, I continued with my campaigning. What that involved was continuing to knock on doors, continuing to meet with organizations and groups, residents groups, parents groups, ratepayers associations. The consultation process for me continued. In 2006, in June, the June election of 2006, I found myself, I can remember late one evening in the campaign headquarters in Fall River and getting a telephone call. It was after 9 o'clock at night, so I had been out doing some door-to-door, but due to the time of the evening, I called it tonight and was in just looking at the messages of the day. I received a telephone call from a resident that was living in the far end of the riding in towards Dartmouth. And he wanted to talk to me about what I felt about. He hadn't made up his mind on which way he was going to vote. He had some questions that he wanted to run by me just so that he could get a feel for me as one of the candidates in the election. And during the course of the conversation, he said, I know the hour's getting late, Mr. Paris, but when we finish this telephone call, I live at, he gave me a street address. He said, if you could drive out here, I said, I think I made up my mind how I'm going to vote. And if you drive out here, I'll have a donation for you. And again, I want to reiterate that it was at the far end of the riding, so it was a considerable distance from the Fall River campaign headquarters. So I hopped in my car and I drove out there some number of kilometers to the end of the riding, knocked on his door. He greeted me with a smile on his face, and he beckoned me. He kind of motioned me. He said, let's go outside and talk. And not much was said, but he gave me a $5 bill. Mr. Speaker, I say that story because that $5 bill that I got from that gentleman was just as important as the $1,000 donation I got from some other individuals without the consultation. So I wanted to say that story just to talk about, as we talk about electoral reform. And I think it's already been said by the previous speaker that this isn't what we considered a bad bill. What we considered that this bill has great potential and it can fuel and promote with the amendment as put forward by the honourable member from Cole Harbour. the leader of the NDP, as the bill currently reads, it allows or gives permission or maybe even condones past activity which may be best described, and I'll be very, very polite here, may be best described as somewhat suspect. With a bill as important as this, I would think, and I would like to think as an elected MLA representing Waverly, Fall River, Beaverbank, and I would think that all MLAs are in the same boat, that we want to produce the best legislation that we possibly can. And how do we do that? We do that by consultation. Anytime we have the opportunity to present bills in front of this House, I think it's incumbent upon us as MLAs to consult not only with one another and have the lively and the legitimate two-way debate, but I think it's also incumbent on us to have that same lively interaction and engagement with those people that have put us in power. It would seem to me that with a bill that we all recognize as important to this House and indeed to Nova Scotians, that I would like to think that we and the party that's tabled the bill would welcome the opportunity for things to be tweaked and massaged a little bit and to made better. Important legislation, Mr. Speaker. We owe important legislation to the constituents of all of Nova Scotia. I think, and I'm going to say I think, that we all want electoral reform. I don't think there's any question. I don't think anyone's going to argue that we don't want it. Certainly no one on this side of the House is going to argue against it. We've got a bill here entitled Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act. Mr. Speaker, we've got the word disclosure. Well, my view is let's have Bill 117 represent real disclosure. As it currently stands, the bill doesn't go far enough. Hence the amendment. It does not level the playing field in terms of reform. It makes an attempt to do that, an honest attempt. It doesn't go far enough. I agree, and I'm sure all members in this House agree, that electoral reform is necessary. But this bill as it stands, in its current form, is not acceptable. If we are going to do electoral reform, truly do it, then, Mr. Speaker, we owe it not only to ourselves, but to the voters to do it right. Doesn't it stand to reason that we, all of us, want to do the right things for Nova Scotians, regardless of whether I'm PC or Liberal or NDP? We are all elected to this House for the same reason, for the good of the public. We want to do the public good. I don't think there's a member in this House that doesn't want to do the public good. Is there anyone that's going to debate that? I don't think so. I think we were all here, we ran because we wanted to do something for the province of Nova Scotia and for those that we represent. So I'm having a problem here today. I'm having a problem trying to understand. I'm trying to fathom. I'm trying to get through in my own mind as to why we're not being open and receptive, one, to the amendment, secondly, to a 6-month period of consultation. If we can make something better, why wouldn't we try to make it better? I guess that's why I'm confused. Mr. Speaker, governments are elected by the people. We have an obligation to the public, which includes, but certainly it's not limited to, 1, accountability. 2, responsibility. 3, transparency. And Mr. Speaker, last but certainly not least, integrity. People expect that from us. I know when between 2003 and 2006, even though there wasn't an election called and I was still doing that campaigning, the first immediate response that I would get when I'd knock on somebody's door or I'd go to that community club meeting, the first thing they would say, well, you're here at the door. Is there an election? Has there been an election called and I don't know about it? Because people would say, it's very, very strange to see a politician if there's not an election pending in the very, very immediate future. So we tried. So what we did, by me doing that, it certainly changed that perception. So it would only stand to reason that consultation does pay some dividends.
Obviously worked out.
It worked out for me.
What was the name of that other guy? He's gone.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not a gifted speaker.
Come on, Percy.
There have certainly been much gifted speakers to me over the last 24 hours, and I certainly acknowledge that. And also, I'm the type of person that when I hear something, what I like to do is I like to take it away, massage it, think about it. I internalize it, and I might even think about it some more. It takes me a little while sometimes to get things, and so I think there are a lot of people like me. I think there are a lot of people that during a period of consultation like to hear things, take it away overnight, maybe sometimes 2 or 3 nights, I don't know. Depends on the individual because we're all different. What works for one may not work for someone else. But I think, Mr. Speaker, people need the consultation. People want to be engaged. People want to know that they're part of the process. People don't want to look at a politician and say, you're here at my door now, well, there must be an election pending. Mr. Speaker, I have some concerns concerning electoral reform. My learned friend and colleague from Eastern Passage yesterday, he rose in his place and he provided some insight in a thumbnail sketch respecting some well-known political icons from Nova Scotia's past. I remember it so well. He spoke so well and with great passion. He spoke about the Joe Howes of yesterday, and he spoke about the political roots in Nova Scotia and the significance of Nova Scotian politicians of years gone by, of years past. Mr. Speaker, I say that over the course of the years, the political torch has been passed from generation to generation. Mr. Speaker, it is now our turn. It's our turn to hold that political torch. We now are the holders. As such, because we now hold that political torch, and it's only on loan to us, we don't own it, we're just borrowing it. But as such, we have a moral and spiritual obligation that comes with the holding of that political torch that we have in our hands now. Let us not allow our legacy to be one of complacency. Let's let our legacy be one that we can be proud of, all of us, as elected officials. Let us someday, Mr. Speaker, be in the position so that when someone rises in this hollow place and talks about us, they will say something similar to electoral reform got its rebirth or its restart with us. This is what we can do. We talk about, we as politicians, it's called political will. We've got to have the political will. We can look at legislation and we can comment about how good it is, how great it is, how much potential it has. But really, if we don't have the political will to enact it, it's not going to go anywhere. We can talk the game, but can we play the game? A lot of people talk the game. Our legacy in part can be not only about passing good legislation and talking about political reform, but it's also we can again demonstrate to those people that have put us here that we have the political will to work together for the good of the whole. Now that's a new one now, isn't it? Huh? PCs and liberals and NDP, because people elected us to this house to do a job. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, to do that job, to accomplish what we have to accomplish, what does it mean? It means working together. That's what it's all about. As it stands now, under the electoral reform, what we need is we need a committee, a commission. We need something that's made up of PCs, of liberals, of NDP that are going to sit together and consult with the public. For the next 6 months. It'll take us 6 months to do that. We can do that. We don't want to be one pulling in one direction and another pulling in another direction. What good does it do? What sort of message does that send to the electorate?
I don't know.
You know?
What do you think they're saying?
Part of the reason that I stand here in my place today is because I think it's because of my reputation.
I think so.
I think it's because, despite what some honorable members may think, Mr. Speaker, I can be one of the easiest person in the world to get along with. And I may get some argument about that, but generally speaking, people know where they stand with me. There's no, I don't know what the appropriate word is, because my colleague used the word one time and he got in trouble over it, so I better not use that one. But yeah, it's hard to find the word sometimes. But what you see is what you get without the frills. Well, no thrills. Grassroots. Wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I stand here in my place not through entitlement, but I stand here because I've been privileged by the electorate, and I'm thankful for that. Mr. Speaker, we've heard over the last 24 hours or so, we've heard comments about trust funds. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we're going to be honest, and let's be honest, that trust funds have been a blemish on the political environment in this province. Mr. Speaker, I am saying to you, Mr. Speaker, with all the utmost respect, I need time to visit with the voters. I have a riding that is vast. I need time to explain to the people in Waverley, Fall River, and Beaverbank Bill number 117 and the implications. I have to not only explain to the people in the riding the strengths, but I also have to expose the weaknesses of the bill and the reason for the proposed amendment. Mr. Speaker, since I've been in MLA, thank you, I've experienced numerous caseloads. Part of the process, I'm a firm believer in consultations. When I'm not in the House, and I'm sure many MLAs experience the same thing, when we're not in this House, when we're in our riding, and more specifically when we're in our constituency office, I know I have individuals and families that just drop in, talk. Talk is consultation. They want to come in, they want to consult. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has that experience. I'm sure there are many of us that have those same share those same experiences. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that with all the caseloads that I have, that there are no two cases that are identical.
Every single one is different.
They all share some commonalities and some similarities. For the most part, my caseloads involve individuals and or families wanting or needing something from government, something that they feel only government can give them. Mr. Speaker, how can I explain to those same people, those same families, when they question me about the lack of responsibility and transparency if we allow ourselves, without the amendment with Bill 117, I'd be hard-pressed to have a legitimate excuse or be able to explain. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned about Waverley, Fall River, Beaver Bank, and I'm sure by now, I think everybody that within earshot realizes how large a riding it is. It's a riding with numerous communities within the boundaries of the riding. It is important to me as an MLA to seek the 6 months on behalf of the voters in that riding, because that time will allow me much needed time to meet, to consult with the constituencies around this very important bill. Absolutely. This is an important bill. There's no denying that. Mr. Speaker, this morning, like I suspect many Nova Scotians, I woke to the news this morning, Mr. Speaker, and I also had an opportunity to glance at the newspapers. I seen the front page of the local papers. I seen of the Herald, the inside story on the Daily News, and it was about Bill 117. And I found it interesting to read and to hear about an issue. Now, this is an issue that yesterday, the comments that I heard, well, the comments were such, well, beating a dead horse. Yeah. It's not important. It's not on the radar. It's just a blimp on the radar. It's not going to last. Mr. Speaker, I disagree. 6 months would be sufficient time for me to validate that premise, one way or the other. 6 months provides the time frame for public consultation and input. When I think back to, and I want to go back, I'm going to replay my mental tape, my memory tape, and think about 2003 campaign and 2006 campaign. And I can say in all sincerity that when I discuss with people on their doorsteps, sometimes, well, what are some of the things that are bothering you? What are some things that are a concern to you? They would talk about a number of things, a great diversity of issues. But if we talk long enough, a number of people would mention trust funds. Along with trust funds, they would mention party contributions. Mr. Speaker, I think that the message was clear, is that maybe this wasn't at the top of the list, but it certainly was on the radar screen. Sometimes we don't want to think that the electorate is ill-informed or not knowledgeable, because that's not the case. Certainly not the case in Waverley, Fall River, Beaver Bank, because they're very knowledgeable of what's going on in the House of Assembly and what's going on in the political arenas around Nova Scotia. So it makes me, and I think this leads to my that confusion that I talked about earlier as to why when we have this golden opportunity to improve on something that's going to affect all Nova Scotians, why we aren't chomping at the bit to do it. Now, hopefully, before it's all said and done, someone can answer that. I don't think the answer lies on this side of the House. I'm going to add that I think people do care. And I think they've demonstrated that care in a number of ways. One way could be by the act of voting itself. A second way, as ironic as this may sound, may be by not voting at all. So people have different ways of expressing themselves. I know that, and I'm not going to, I can't put a number to it, but I think we all have met that individual or individuals that have said, I'm not voting for whatever reason or reason. And it's unfortunate, even if we have one voter in the province of Nova Scotia thinking that they're not going to exercise the right to vote. Shame on us. Shame on all of us. I'm not picking on any one party here. Mr. Speaker, the public does read and listen to the news, listen to the radio. They read the papers, they read the news. Sometimes, just because if it's not, news only carries for so many days. I don't know what the lifeline of a story would be. I don't know if it's 2 days, 3 days, a week, or whatever. But it's short. But because it's not front and center, we can't take for granted that people forget or that it's not important. People remember. I've heard, Mr. Speaker, and again, I'm sure we all have, that sometimes we have people that read the paper or hear something on the news related to us as politicians, and what do they say? Not all the time, but sometimes if it's bad, I've heard, oh, here we go again. We've got an opportunity here, Mr. Speaker, to take politics in another direction in Nova Scotia. I think it would be a shame for us as MLAs to miss out on that opportunity. When it comes to a bill that's so important as this bill is, because of the vastness of my riding, I need time to organize, to set up meetings, to book space, to schedule the meetings. That will be my attempt, in part, to do that consultation process. You know, Mr. Speaker, something I've heard in the House is I've heard the word equality mentioned. We talk about equality. We talk about this bill, and we even use the word equality with respect to this bill. Well, this is a time, Mr. Speaker, this is a time when PCs, Liberals, NDP, to not only just talk about equality, but to actually put it into effect. And how, Mr. Speaker, can we achieve that? Well, one thing we could do with Bill 117 is there's a figure there, that $5,000 figure, one stroke of the pen. That's all it would take. One stroke of the pen, and what can we do? We can cross out that 5. And we're left with zeros. A mere stroke of the pen. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is not about the media. This is not about the press. This is not about the polls. What this is about doing the right thing for Nova Scotia. It's about regaining some lost credibility. It's about taking back some of that political real estate that we might have lost over the years. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, I stand here and I talk about parties working together. You know, that may fall on some deaf ears. It may be a joke in some circles. I suspect, though, Mr. Speaker, there'll be many voters out there who do not find this funny in any way, shape, or form. I think their expectations are higher than what we give them credit for. A 6-month timeline will give us time to test my philosophy. I guess in my confusion, I'll say that I guess I'm also somewhat surprised. And I would probably say to a large degree, I guess I'm disappointed that we as MLAs and that we collectively could not or would not be more proactive in our efforts to restore public faith and trust in the Nova Scotia political process. In a time when we as politicians, you know, we wonder why, well, voter turnout is low, and we say, well, how can we fix that? We raise these questions. Well, we say, well, it's not true that the only time that a politician is around at election time. I mean, we're trying to change some of the ways that the people think about us. This would have been an ideal opportunity to commence with that change. Change starts here. It comes back to something I said earlier about the political will. I'm surprised, disappointed that we don't seize this opportunity and see it for what it is. I entered politics, Mr. Speaker, for a number of reasons. In my response to the throne speech, I can remember when I got up at such short notice, not knowing what to say or where it was going to go and how it was going to end up, but I do remember one statement that I made. And I mentioned, I compared, I can remember this very, very well. I talked about the election of 2006, and I talked about values. I talked about in Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank, how important that election was for the residents of Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank. And I referred to it being an election where 2006 values versus values and beliefs of 1956. Mr. Speaker, this bill in the NDP proposed amendments as put forward by the member from Cole Harbour. It's about a vision as to how politics can be in Nova Scotia and not about the past. Mr. Speaker, passing of Bill 117 as it stands is an endorsement off of a particular event in politics, in Nova Scotia politics, that we need to fix. It's been years now, years later, an activity that occurred years ago is still making front page news. Well, time to fix. If it's broken, you fix it. The wheel's broken. We as members of the House of Assembly owe it to generations of Nova Scotians. We even owe it to past generations of Nova Scotians that stood and were seated in the very places that we occupy. But, Mr. Speaker, more importantly, we owe it to another group of generations that maybe haven't even been born yet. There's people that we're going to pass the torch to. That political torch, what sort of shape do we want that torch to be in? We got a chance to do something right. But for whatever reason or reasons, we're stalling on it. Mr. Speaker, I would say, shame on us. Shame on us, Mr. Speaker, as elected officials. We have an opportunity to provide valuable assistance to move electoral reform forward. Bill 117 is not that opportunity as it stands. With amendments, it can be. Shame on us, Mr. Speaker, for not adhering to the faith and to the trust the electorate has placed in each and every one of us. For not taking an important piece of legislation and not being allowed to tinker with it, to massage it, to make it the best that it can be. Mr. Speaker, I talked a little bit about regaining some political real estate here in Nova Scotia.
Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the honourable member would permit an introduction.
Will you? He will.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank for allowing me to make this introduction. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased this afternoon to rise in my place and through you to all members of the House introduce a gentleman in the East Gallery that is a proud Nova Scotian. He hails from liberated Holland, and he's very appreciative of the Canadian military and the work they did back in World War II, but also he gave a very colorful, descriptive illustration type speech to the Stewiacke Royal Canadian Legion on November the 11th, and Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, you could have heard a pin drop in that jam-packed Legion Hall when Mr. Herman Burfalo made a speech to the community. So I'd ask Herman to rise and receive a warm welcome from everybody in the House.
Thank you. The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
I too would like to extend, Mr. Speaker, a warm welcome on behalf of this side of the House. I was talking about, Mr. Speaker, about regaining some of the lost real estate, the lost political real estate here in Nova Scotia. The political trust, I want to talk about the political trust just very, very brief. Now, during the course of the day, I know things got somewhat heated in here today, off and on all day. So even though it's a cool November day on the outside, it got pretty warm here on the inside. But I want to talk about political trust. And I want to talk about political trust and how it relates to the citizens, to the good citizens of Nova Scotia. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it's I got no statistics to say that it's this percentage or that percentage, but there is a certain segment of Nova Scotia population that is somewhat cynical when it comes to politicians. I don't think I don't want to involve or get involved in a debate on whether that's right or wrong, but that's just a fact of life. That's just the way it is. But when I look at Bill 117, and again I see this opportunity. This opportunity with good legislation, that we have an opportunity to make it so much better, but yet we're not. And it comes back to the question that I asked earlier, and it's the why question. I don't have the answer to that, but I would like to have an answer, because maybe somewheres, as somebody explaining to me the why, who knows? Maybe I'll agree with it. I won't know that until somebody explains to me the why. But this is, as a rookie MLA, this is quite an experience for me. It's a debate that's one-sided. All the other times I've, whether it been a rookie, whether it be with on the ice or in any type of sporting arena, there was always some sort of competitiveness between me and somebody else. And somebody would, I can remember when I was playing hockey with the Huskies many, many years ago, that it was, you knew who your competition was, because if he had better skills than you, there was no debate if he made the team. But if you had better skills than he did and you got cut, then you would obviously see reason for debate. But you would always know why. Here, I don't know why, because I haven't heard the reasons why. What we're looking for is a process that's going to engage and involve the citizens of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, where I stand, no matter when you do that, and every time you do that you're inviting participation from the population, I see that as a good thing. I see that as a good thing for everyone. I see that as a win-win. It's a win-win for PCs, for Liberals, and for NDP, and for the people of Nova Scotia. We all win. I'm having a great difficulty here trying to phantom this. Maybe sometime over the next little while, someone will explain to me, either in this chamber or maybe it'll be outside. Unfortunately, if it's outside, it's not only me that has to hear the message. We talked about, I was talking about public trust. One of the things that we have to do, Mr. Speaker, is we have to restore the public trust into us as politicians. And again, it's not about how large a segment of that population is when it comes to the public trust. The important thing is that there is a segment of the population that doesn't have that public trust. I don't care if it's 1% or 50%. We should be concerned about that, if it is that 1%. You know, how do you change or how do you achieve public trust? Well, I don't have all the answers, but I know one of the ways to achieve that public trust is through dialogue. And how do you dialogue with the public? It's called a consultation process. It's not, you know, it's not rocket science here. I don't think, and again, I'm not the speaker that my learned friend from Eastern Passage is, but this isn't rocket science. This is about, I'd like to say it's more about common sense, I guess. It's just giving the electorate their opportunity. They put us here. We give them their opportunity to say something to us. So I think that comes down to something I mentioned earlier about the confusion. And again, I can't drive this home enough, is that we got an opportunity here to make something better. And why we're not doing it is beyond me. I think that's part of the reason that we're here, is to make things better. I know I took a pledge like everybody else did, and I know that when I'm on the street and I meet voters, they're going to say to me, and I think part of the reason that we're all here, and let's talk about public trust again, is because somebody trusts us. There's somebody out there that trusts us. So if we get an opportunity to tweak a bill, let's tweak it. Let's make it stronger. Let's make it better. This is what the proposed amendment does. It makes the bill stronger and better. I can only hope that other members in this House, other than my colleagues on this side of the House, will try to convince me as to why Bill 117 should remain as it is. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, it's my opinion. I'm not saying that this bill is wrong. I'm saying that this bill has potential. It has potential. In its present form, it is not the bill that I, or can I say we, want to see. I don't know why it's hard. I don't know why it's so difficult for the other parties to accept this. And I just want to go back to the trust funds, if I may, just for a minute, Mr. Speaker, because it seems to me we have a system here in Nova Scotia. It's called the justice system. Now, whether we like it individually or whether we don't like it, when the courts reach a decision, we as law-abiding citizens respect that decision. We may not always agree with the verdict, but we accept that verdict. And so, I'm a little somewhat puzzled to think that 2006, that trust funds are still here, still being discussed. Well, we've got a choice about the legacy that we're going to leave. We've got a choice. We can just let things continue as they are and do nothing, or we can make it better. So when we pass that torch, when we pass that political baton, that torch on to the next group of MLAs that are going to sit in this House, they're going to say, thank you. Thank you. One of the things that my father and my mother taught me, they taught me, Percy, if anything in life, try to be a better person tomorrow than what you are today. Well, you know what? You know what? Let's take this legislation and let's make it better tomorrow than what it is today. You know, we have Mr. Speaker, we as MLAs, we have rules and regulations that we have to abide by, outlined by the Speaker's office. And I know when I seen that orientation book and how thick it was, and I think I've probably made more visits to the Speaker's office than anyone else, and it's starting to be a bit of a humorous, all in fun joke over there, and I always try to smile when I come in because I always go in there because I'm asking for clarification on something, or I'm going to get my knuckles rapped because I did something wrong. But the Speaker's office has been very, very generous and very tolerant of my ignorance in a very professional and good way, and I thank them for that. And the reason I mention that is because this reminds me a little bit, those rules and regulations that were put in at the Speaker's office for us to follow, I'm sure that those didn't happen overnight. I'm sure that those rules and regulations that we adhere to were a process and work for many years. And I would think and I would hope that they're still working on those, that when they see something that's wrong, they're going to fix it for the better, make it better, and so that we can be accountable and responsible and also transparent. You know, and that's what we're looking for with Bill 117. We're looking for the same things with that bill that we expect from ourselves. And why is that so hard to understand? Now, we can also agree about a level playing field, and I just want to talk about that level playing field for a minute because I tell you, the level playing field and this equality has great concerns for me, because I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, that everybody in this House, when they talk about equality and a level playing field, I'm not sure, with all due respect, they know what they're talking about. And you know what? I don't say that as to insult anyone. That's not the intent of it. But, you know, when we talk about equality, there's a lot of danger there. Because sometimes when we treat people equally, we're ignoring the differences. So we start ignoring differences of people, then we're not treating them fairly. So, Mr. Speaker, we've got to be very aware of the things we do, and we've got to be very aware of the things we don't do. We've got a chance. We've got an opportunity. We got an opportunity to do the right thing, but for whatever reason or reasons, we are stalling. Disagreements happen, but on a case like this, when it comes to legislation of this nature, legislation that's so important, I wonder why. And I'll end there on that note, and the question for me is why.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I don't think I'm going to be able to answer my honourable colleague's question of why. But I think that we all have a lot of questions in our minds, and I want to be clear at first. Just as I always do, I welcome the opportunity to stand up to speak to this bill. But I'm not as pleased with this bill as I am with a great many others that have come forward. The trouble with this bill is it's based on a fundamentally good concept, an essential concept, in fact, but it's way too little, it's way too late, and it's way too hasty. And it's that last fact which makes this such a dangerous precedent and such an extraordinary action, and really an autocratic action, to be coming forward in this House at all in the first place. I had the opportunity, and I've got to say, it was a real privilege. I was asked to speak to a tenants association a couple of weeks ago, and it was a tenants association in one of the poorest areas of probably this entire province. I think you'd recognize it if I named it. So it's in my constituency. It's subsidized housing. And there had been a tenants association in force in the past, but something happened to it. Although it was under the auspices of the Department of Community Services that it was established, for years there was no audit, for years there was no annual general meeting, and there was no change of officers, and there was a tremendous amount of grumbling, just grumbling, that used to take place. And as I say, I was really honored that I was asked recently to come and to help the tenants of this area rebuild their association. And I found myself giving this very, very, very basic and really a lot of fun kind of discussion on what it means to be an association, what it means to be a community. People had come to sit on the board of the Tenants Association who were not, in fact, tenants. They lived in the area, but they were not on the lease. But you know, that wasn't a known part of it. The definition of community was not entirely clear, except to the members of the community themselves. And as I say, there hadn't been meetings. There was nothing set up about just when the meetings ought to be taking place. And I was amazed by just how thoughtful and incisive the questions were that people asked, many of whom, not all of whom were literate, many of whom had certainly not finished high school. But the questions were, well, I want to be the treasurer too. So we're going to have an election. And it's everybody, put their hands up. Well, no, we need to have some record of that there was in fact an election. Yeah, we can't have this just plain happen. And once the election took place, and it was recorded, and there was a motion, and we had to explain the concept of putting a motion on the floor and seconding it and taking a vote, because that leaves a record. That leaves traces in the democratic process of how decisions have been made. And what's amazing about this bill, this proposal here, is that there are very few traces that are going to be left in the public record as to exactly how this fundamental set of decisions was made about who is, in fact, a member of the electoral community. As far as I know, the members of the electorate are individuals. But what we've had up to this point is a whole lot of bodies corporate who have been inserting themselves into the electoral process, sometimes by making very large donations. And that continues. And as long as that continues, we're going to have a mismatched kind of a system in which the community that exercises the power is not the same as the community which gave the power. And that's not democratic. For us to decide at this point, this very, very hasty and brief way, that we are going to revise the entire electoral system of this province without consulting the people, the electorate, who use that system, who count on that system by which to exercise the voice, I can't describe that in any other way than fundamentally undemocratic. You know, I was naive when I came into this process. I hadn't been involved in politics before. I never ran for student council. I didn't run for municipal council. I wasn't even particularly part of associations. So it was a bit of a shock to the system in the middle of the first election that I was involved with when I was told that one of the suppliers for materials in the community had put up a sign for a member of the other party. And the proposal was, well, we're not going to buy our supplies from this person in our community anymore because they're supporting the other party. And I'm thinking to myself, well, my God, they're a member of our community. Why aren't we going to support them? And I objected. I objected to the idea of pulling the business from the member of our electoral community, the person who was at work in the riding in which the election was taking place, simply because they had publicly stated their support for a member of another party. As it happened, they hadn't even been asked whether or not to display they would be willing to display their support for another party. But I was really horrified. And in fact, we did end up getting our supplies from the local supplier. And I thought, fine, we have at least kept it in the community. Another thing that surprised me after I was first elected was the number of people who came to me, well-positioned, well-educated, well-empowered, who prefaced their request for legislative intervention of one sort or another with the automatic, I voted for you, of course. And I was thinking, gee, I thought I was elected to be a representative of a community, and that in fact this had all been distilled, and that I was the representative of the largest amount of the community. But that did not mean, as far as I understood it, that it meant that I was no longer that I would not represent the people of the community who had not voted for me. And after a while, dismissing people and saying, I don't care. What I do care about is, in fact, whether what you are asking for makes sense. After a while, I stopped getting those embarrassing confessions of whether true or not, of, I voted for you, of course. I didn't like to see people abasing themselves this way in order to present what should have been perfectly good policy requests, or not, as the case may be. And I'd like to think that the people of my riding have grown out of it. It's a kind of maturity that comes with this belief and self-confidence that comes and says, what I am asking for, what I want, is justified, not because of what I've done to get it, but because it is right. And that's what I think we in this chamber should be hoping is going to take place throughout this province. I was horrified. And I think the way some of us say we are proud, perhaps I will be known for I was horrified, because the stories that I have heard over the years of a man, I mean, this is going back a ways, but a man who was one of a huge family which voted the wrong way, and the father, the breadwinner's job, was removed the day after the opposing government came to power, leaving a man with a huge family to support and no job, not because his work wasn't good, but simply because his vote was not good. And what this means, money is power, particularly in a fear-driven society. And I won't say a community, but it's a fear-driven society. And so that's why it matters so much that we be in a position to follow the money. How does it work? Money itself isn't power. Money buys votes. Well, how does it do that? It does it directly. It can be, in the old days, just a very direct exchange of goods. As I've been told, there used to be a bottle of rum on the front seat of the car that drove the person to the polling station. Or it can be indirect. It can be the result of fear. It can be the result of hearing that if you don't vote on the winning side, X is not going to happen in your constituency. And this happened in my constituency. It happened in the constituency of a number of my colleagues. And people have come to know what this means. It means you're not going to get anything if your constituency doesn't vote the right way. Well, how do they tell? What are the prevailing winds? They tell by the number of signs that are out there. It's really simple. It takes money to buy signs, it takes money to buy advertising time, and it's a conspicuous display of power. You could even say it's ostentatious. It's certainly not this hallmark of a mature political process. So it's interesting that we're talking about this. Ideally, we wouldn't be talking about just how much money comes from where and whom, but if money wasn't translating into the sign that tells you, like the ribbons that you have on a sailboat, a telltale, a sign that says, this is the way the wind is blowing, you better get yourself aligned just right, then perhaps we wouldn't need to be worrying about this bill at this point. But we do. And we live in a province which I'm afraid is known outside, in the outside world, as a province in which people sell their birthright. They sell their vote, their individual vote. And they will sell it to bodies corporate. They will sell it to individuals. And as long as it's on offer, that will continue to be the case. And it's very sad. It's embarrassing. It really is. You can laugh at me for being naive here, but I really did grow up believing that the people who sit in the legislature are elected as representatives, not politicians. And representative does mean, in fact, that you are elected to present the views, to bring them back of the electorate. And the electorate is not Colgate. The electorate is not the CAW. I've always wondered, and I'm afraid I haven't had enough time to check in the last day and a half since this bill came forward. I haven't had a chance to look at many annual reports, any annual reports as a matter of fact, to see just how the shareholders of various corporations which donate to political parties in Nova Scotia, just how those donations are accounted for to the shareholders. I don't remember ever seeing in an annual report donation to X party or donation to Y party. It seems that that's not something the shareholders are actually informed of. I guess it's a cost of doing business. But you know, I'll bet there's a lot of individual electors who would be very, very interested to know just how much of the support, how much of the profit of the company in which they are investing is going to literally counteract their individual born right to vote, their democratic right. So I'd like to see some transparency. I wouldn't mind seeing donations just plain not coming from bodies corporate, and in that I'd like to make it very clear that any body corporate can include a union just as well. These donations are things, they are, in many ways, they should be tokens of faith. That's the sort of thing we've been hearing, and I think a lot of people in this legislature have received tokens of faith from their electors. People who've called them outside and said, I want to give you something, and it's $5, or it's, you know, in a couple cases, $2, $10. And you sure don't scorn those things because they mean an enormous amount. They come from the essence of the person who really believes that their individual voice does in fact count and has not been negated by larger amounts of money coming from larger and not necessarily representative entities. Corporate bodies might not be voters, and they're not entitled to a vote, but they certainly get a voice. And when I was in the Greystone, it was very interesting because the kinds of things that people, when I was working with one of the communities that I talked to, the kinds of questions that were being asked were things like, are we going to start an art gallery? Are we going to keep the food bank going? So-and-so's been hoarding the food. The food's not getting distributed. It all gets given to, and this is the truth, and sometimes the food spoils because it's being hoarded by the people who run the food bank for their own families. And that's pretty sad, but that's another story. The fact that that food can be hoarded by the owners or the operators of the entity for the benefit of themselves and their families, that's a function of just who got elected and gets elected to the board. And that, in turn, is a function of the decision-making process. And the people who are entitled to receive anything at all from that organization, and the people who are entitled to have representatives decide for them, or no, not even entitled to have representatives, are entitled to ask representatives, are entitled to delegate representatives to make some decisions for them so they don't have to occupy themselves with the absolute minutiae of, shall we pay so-and-so so much to run the lunch program? How much are we willing to pay for a new cartridge of printer ink? Should we, in fact, pay for a taxi to go pick up the check which so-and-so has written? Did so-and-so actually sign the letter? The people of the community have the right to delegate those kinds of decisions, minute decisions and bigger decisions, to a body of people that they trust. And when they don't trust that body, and when that body doesn't do anything to earn their trust, doesn't follow the rules, or maybe acts to change the rules when they're not on deck to see the discussion take place, then things start going awry. And I feel at times as if that's what we're seeing in this legislature. This is a government which consults obsessively. It consults, and it consults, not always fruitfully. We've certainly had to fight long and hard to get the results of certain consultations actually brought into being, quite apart from having them proclaimed as legislation. There's a lot of long steps between the consultation of the people and the execution of the will of the people. But what I find is really interesting about this pattern of obsessive consultation is it suggests to me that this is the delegation right back to the people who delegated these representatives of their decision-making responsibilities. Now, why would you do that? If this was a government that trusted that it was truly representative of the Nova Scotian community, this would not be a government which felt, we better ask, we better ask, we better ask. And you know what? It's another sign of immaturity and insecurity. And you wonder where that insecurity comes from. I can only think it comes from an underlying understanding that, as a matter of fact, the group of people which caused the result of this election may not be exactly representative of the will of the largest number of the individual members. So we have legislation that talks on and on and on about consulting the members of the community. We never know who the community are. The community is a nebulous and very difficult thing to define, except when you come to the electorate. It's real clear. We've got riding boundaries, we have citizenship, we have got, electoral lists. There's a lot of process there. It's been built up over a lot of time, and it makes it very clear who are the people who are able and entitled to delegate representatives to the House of Assembly to speak for them. And it's almost rude to go back to those people. It's kind of irresponsible to go back to those people all the time and say, we're going to consult with you now. You know, if in fact the election had been a real consultation and there was real faith placed in that elected body, then maybe it wouldn't be necessary to keep on going back to the consultation well. And I think that's something that we ought to be thinking about long and hard when we look at revising the electoral process without consulting the people who use the process. What a shortcut. There's an awful lot of ways that we can consult. And we have consulted, and we have consulted ad infinitum, but not this time, not when it comes time to decide on the process by which the people will elect us to make those decisions for them. That I find absolutely untenable and profoundly undemocratic. It's okay to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish. That's great. But without the habitat protection that that trout needs in order to stay alive, it doesn't really matter very much. And if we're not having those discussions in the place, whose fault is it? It's our fault. It's the fault of the people who have been delegated by the electorate of this province to make decisions. And if we're only making decisions about light questions, to put it politely, then we're avoiding the real work. And if we're going to make executive decisions about how we're brought here to make the decisions, to decide which ones need to be made, which ones can be made, if we're going to short-circuit the right of the electorate by, for once, suddenly not consulting them, then that is a failure of democracy. And that's part of this whole vengeance politics thing. Money equals electoral power, and the electorate needs to be made to believe that they won't even get representative unless they manage to find themselves on the winning side. And that's why you get the interesting phenomenon of, I think it's called drinking from two wells, companies which make two sets of donations, or more recently sometimes three probably, so that somehow they can say they have in fact ended up on the winning side. Kind of wonder what makes those companies actually feel that they need to contribute and what's the value of it. I don't know. It's hard to imagine that I'm the only Nova Scotian who could be offended that a would-be premier can still cheerfully tell the voters they won't get, quote, anything in their area if they don't vote for a certain member of the would-be government. Last week, I understand, or last summer, I understand, some voters were told this would be exactly the case, that a certain NDP member would never, quote, get anything for her constituents under a progressive conservative government because she's not a progressive conservative. The interesting part about this is the kinds of things that were up for grabs aren't even in the direct realm of responsibility of the provincial government. So how does it work that you can be made to believe that you won't get anything from a provincial government or a municipal government if you don't end up on the winning side? And that brings me to the second point of my discussion here. There's something else that's missing from this legislation. It's certainly missing from this province, and it's a long, hard look at municipal politics and the relationship of municipal politics to provincial politics. It's well known that a reasonable haul of the municipal politicians, of the provincial candidates in any given election are in fact sitting municipal politicians. That's a bit of a boost. It's a bit of a springboard. It's a good starting place to have the public profile and, one could argue at times, perhaps the public purse to launch a provincial campaign from. If any one of us in this chamber chose to run for federal office, we would be required to stand down during that time and to run on an equal playing field with any other member of the public. That's not the case, though, when you're getting yourself into provincial politics. And I would argue that that is probably a very real advantage given to a certain body of people who enter provincial politics. So, Why don't we look at municipal finances? Why don't we look at the fact that when you analyze the contributions of municipal candidates in, for example, the Halifax Regional Municipality, which includes some 40% of the electorate of the province of Nova Scotia, which likes to discuss the fact that it's the size of Prince Edward Island, which is undoubtedly a very large electoral body, but which is not subject to the kinds of disclosure rules that the provincial legislature is. Why is it that when you find those contribution lists, so many of the contributions are corporate? And they're frequently the same corporate contributors who are contributing to provincial campaigns at the same time. So maybe we should be looking at corporate contributions. There are big numbers going into municipal campaigns, and municipal campaigns are frequently the basis for provincial campaigns. I would say that we should be ensuring that electoral reform engages electoral reform at all levels in this province if we're really serious about this. Disclosure at the very least, and maybe a very skeptical eye indeed at the contributions of corporate bodies to the election campaigns of municipal politicians. And I think this is particularly important to me because my family didn't come from Nova Scotia, but they came from places with a very deep pride in their democratic traditions and with a very local pride in their democratic traditions, places in which individuals elect people to perform just about every function. You could say it's obsessive consultation, but there are elections in there too. And it's disturbing to me that the lowest level of elected representation available to many members of the provincial electorate is in fact municipal representation, and that's the representation of thousands of people. It can involve the donation of thousands of dollars, sometimes from 3, 4, 5 corporations, which are not members of the community. And there's nothing to speak against it. There is absolutely no way for people to find a voice which is not in competition to clamor louder than the voice of the corporate bodies making donations to the candidates. And I find that really disturbing. Maybe that's why I was so honored and I was so privileged to be asked to go to speak to and help with the rebuilding of the Tenants Association in this area that I was talking about. Because a tenants association or a residents association has the function of giving a voice. There isn't any money at play, or at least not directly. So far, the only competition in the elections has been popularity contest only, at a very direct and immediate level. But it makes it, actually it doesn't make it possible, it makes it desirable and possible for this community to speak outside, to represent itself. And you know, if the process is skewed by people voting from outside the community or by agencies voting as though they are residents, then, even then, at that lowest level, people don't have a voice. So what we need to do, this Bill 117 just doesn't go far enough. It's a nice idea, but there's just not enough of it, and it's way too late. There's a long, deep history in various parties, and it's certainly much too hasty. It's impossible to figure out why this legislation has to take effect by year end. I'm fascinated by that one. I just don't know what makes that one tick. Yeah, I don't remember democracy working it by a sort of a year end, on a year-end calendar basis. However, I guess it's going to in this case, if things go through this way, 50 days. There's an awful lot of ways as I think we all know, there's an awful lot of ways that money does in fact translate into the signs of electoral success, and it is, as I say, an immature process in which people believe that they must, in fact, be on the winning side, be riding the winning wave, or else they will simply be snowed under. And I am sad for the people of Nova Scotia for as long as this belief continues. In some ways, though, the declining electoral turnout actually tells us that the electorate is growing up just a little bit, that there is a belief that, in fact, you don't have to play that game. People don't always know which other game to play, and it's a dangerous thing for society at large when people do not know how to choose, do not know how to speak with representatives, how to choose representatives, how to delegate their own power. We have numerous examples recently of people taking the law into their own hands, again, because there is no understanding of how to delegate power. But we've got nearly 1 million people in this province, and if they can't delegate anywhere to a body that they trust has been elected by people like them, by their peers, then we're going to find them working outside the system. And that's a lot of what we're talking about inside this chamber, is the fact that so many people feel disengaged from the process. They do not trust that their so-called community, at least the community of the 1 million people of Nova Scotia, has in fact elected a representative group of people to represent them and make those decisions. And we need to worry about that in a big way, because if we have an electoral turnout of 58%, something like that, most recently, I forget what it was in the most recent election, that means there's 42% of the people who were eligible who have a birthright, which I think we are all educated to believe we have. Some 42% of those people have said, it's not worth it. I can't be bothered. And we need to think, why can't they be bothered? Maybe it's because they think their voices are going to be drowned out. Maybe it's because they think that the decisions aren't being heard. Maybe it's because they know they'll still be consulted obsessively, because those people who end up elected, even if there's only a 2% turnout, will keep on going back and consulting, not necessarily executing the results of the consultation, but at least going through the exercise. It's interesting when you look at campaign contributions, whether they come from corporations or individuals, and when you see that sometimes the people who receive government contracts or whatever are the same people who have made contributions, and it's even more interesting when you find that those contracts actually precede their campaign contributions. And we've seen a little bit of that recently, and that's a very, very disturbing question indeed, that that's been happening. I should, maybe I can digress here a little bit. Well, I'll tell you, if in fact this election reform legislation this Bill 117 doesn't go through at this point, there's going to be some consultation. And there's going to be some consultation that is going to be happening absolutely everywhere. And people will be saying who, for once, they want to make their decisions for them. Who do they trust? Who are they going to go to? Why would this House not want that kind of consultation to take place? 6 months. That's not very long. Voluntary task force reports have languished on the shelves for years. And in fact, they have been preceded by years of consultation. Task force of various sorts. Petroleum pricing, for instance. Touring road shows. You know, MLAs have gone on the road, committees, they've asked questions about all sorts of things. And yet, when they come back, you know, the reports either are received or they are systematically ignored, and then we go through the ritual of raising the question in the House over and over again, whatever happened to the such and such report? Why haven't you acted on the such and such report? Yeah, they're all there. There's a lot of reports, there's a lot of consultation. And you know, we could probably even leave the results of electoral reform consultations on the shelf, but I don't think the people of Nova Scotia would stand for that. The people of Nova Scotia are growing up. They are starting to think that if they make the decision to put their voice, to put their vote into a ballot box, to at least speak to the selection of a representative, they may not, their choice may not win, but they are entitled, they are absolutely and fully entitled to representation by whoever it is who does win. They are growing up. They're not believing anymore that without casting the right ballot, they are going to be punished. The people of Nova Scotia aren't children. They just aren't children. And for us to be bringing this through, saying, these are the rules. Well, you put us here to make the rules. We're going to change the rules now because we think that perhaps some beliefs are changing too, so we're going to change the rules a little bit. But we're not going to ask you about this, even though you're the ones who are going to be using the rules, not us. There's 52 of us in this chamber, and that represents 52 ballots. 52 ballots. Each of us has our own voice. We can use it. We can do what we can to convince those around us, but that's the extent of it. And the people of Nova Scotia are growing up. They're realizing this. I really want to digress here. I want to digress. I want to digress on what it means to be a member of the Legislative Assembly and how people function when they are members of the Legislative Assembly. What happens to people? And more to the point, what happens to people when they aren't representatives anymore? Here we don't talk about elected representatives nearly as much as we should. We keep talking about MLAs and we talk about politicians, and that's it. But I think probably the only way for anybody in this chamber to actually contemplate their return to the status in life where they have one ballot to cast is to realize that they have in fact been chosen to sit here as representative of the majority of the people in the area, the community, the defined community which they serve. And I do think it's too bad that we have so many discussions about remuneration after the fact and so on, when part of what we're dealing with is the fact that people who put themselves forward to be members of the legislature are in fact courting disaster in this province in terms of their employment prospects later, and often courting disaster in terms of their personal prospects. And I would like to see a little bit more attention paid to exactly that fact, because if it's a fear-driven political system, and if it's fear which drives people to stay in this chamber, then we're not working with a mature system, and we should in fact be addressing the problem, which is that all of us are here for only a time. And all of us, every last one of us, will, unless we die in the harness, which some of us threaten to do at times, But every one of us will eventually be facing the issue of returning to be a member of the community which we represented. And the community which we represented is the community of individuals, each of whom was born as a citizen, lives in Nova Scotia, and has the right to cast one ballot, exactly one ballot. We don't go become bodies corporate. We go back and become individuals. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. And I would like to see us recognize that. And maybe there would be a little bit less of the fear which drives people to do what they need to do to stay here. Take it over. Keeping them engaged is absolutely right. And I think we'd get a better electoral turnout as well if, in fact, the electorate realize that people are coming from them, are coming from among their numbers, are being elected by people like them, are continuing to serve people like them, to do their best to digest what is happening and to bring it to policymakers in the trust that policymakers will look at the conflicting interests which do exist, necessarily exist, and measure the best result. But all of us are responsible at the end of the day to the individual community which has chosen us. And if we can only say that a corporation or a union, some non-individual, has put its voice into the mix, has put its money forward in such a way as to make a conspicuous display that shows the individuals who are members of the community that they'd better be afraid, very, very afraid, and they'd better shape up and toe the line. Unless we can stop that process, then we are going to continue to have some of the kinds of discussions and, again, the obsessive consultations. We're going to continue to delegate back to the people of Nova Scotia the responsibility that they have delegated to us. And I think that's a tremendous waste of time, energy, and goodwill. And it happens throughout the province. It happens throughout the municipal governments, as well as the provincial governments. It happens in the school community. I think we could afford to have some real discussion in this province about who's a member of the community, who's a voter. Should people who can't vote contribute? Should they affect the vote? Should they affect the vote to a very large degree, or should we allow them to have a voice to the degree that they are an interest group, at least, and function in the province? Maybe they need a smaller voice. But if you think that those discussions can be had in this chamber without the engagement of the people who depend on this, decide on this, use this system every few years or every few months, as it seems, then we're a pretty arrogant bunch. And I don't want to be part of that. I really don't. Absolutely taking them for granted. So, the consultation is out there. The consultation is out there. The mechanisms are there. It's been used before. There is every single possibility of asking the people of Nova Scotia whether they want non-individuals to contribute, whether they want the results of money obtained by, how shall we say, illegal means. Okay, all right, I wasn't sure which words were, anyway. Whether the results of illegal activity. Has extortion been said? No. Okay, I said no. But, okay, ill-gotten gains, whether those, in fact, are acceptable ways to replace income so that the other income can be used for electoral purposes. So are ill-gotten gains eligible? Are contributions made unwittingly? Because I would argue that shareholders are unwittingly contributing when a corporation doesn't disclose its political activities, or during leadership campaigns, or from outside of the province. But you know, We can't have those discussions in this room. We're biased. We're biased. And I would hope that every single one of the 52 of us in here would realize exactly that. We got here as the result of one process, and whatever happens next to change the process is going to be what decides who are the next group of 52 people to be here. We're not the right people to make this decision. We might be the right people to decide whether the brook trout is in fact the provincial fish. We might be the right people to decide whether or not the amount of money provided on social assistance is in fact adequate to feed a growing child. We might even be the right people to decide how many nursing home beds are going to be needed in this province 5 years from now, and even we might be the right people to decide how many nursing homes are needed in this province today. We might be the right people to do all those things. But we sure as heck aren't the right people to decide who's in here to make those decisions. And I am so pleased, absolutely delighted, to be able to say that I don't support this jury-rigged, rushed through, arrogant effort to revise the electoral rights of every individual in this province, every qualified elector. We're deciding who's qualified. So I don't want to be part of that, and that's why I'm here, okay? And I also, jury-rigged, not good? Jury-rigged's not good? Okay. Let me see. Oh, I can spend the next 5 minutes figuring out a nice synonym for jury-rigged. Okay, don't do it? Okay. Band-Aid solution, or Band-Aids okay? All right. And we need to look not just at the immediate provincial process as well, but we need to remember the fact that as a provincial government, we constitute the rules. We constitute the municipalities. We set up the framework by which municipal governments, the most local and intimate, the last chance, the last ditch resort of the electorate, we set up the system by which those people are in fact elected. So, you know, it shouldn't be happening that during a provincial election, municipal officials, elected municipal officials can go around saying that if the right provincial candidate isn't elected, that the right things aren't going to happen. Don't be fooled, because it's municipal governments who drive the infrastructure bus, and it's provincial and federal governments put in the fuel. But you know, we're going nowhere, absolutely nowhere, unless we know exactly who's in the driver's seat. And that's what this legislation is all about. It's telling us who in this electoral process is in the driver's seat. And another thing that we need to have happen in terms of electoral reform in this province is a little bit of clarity, a little bit more in terms of political science in the education curriculum. I am horrified by the number of people who really one would expect to know better, but who are very confused as to whether X is done by the provincial, the municipal, or the federal government. Yes, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap. Some are in this room, yes, and some have been campaigning outside of this room as well. But you know, we shouldn't be counting on exploiting confusion for electoral success. I'd like to see this act include, or at least this act be tied to, some kind of curriculum unit that is very, very clear indeed as to who does what, who it is. Because people's, as I say, people's goodwill, their energy and their goodwill and their imagination is being exhausted, absolutely worn out by being bounced back and forth from one level of government to the next. And in each case, it seems that there is nothing more happening than an attempt to exhaust the electorate, to disengage the electorate. And how can we be surprised at the end of the day that the electorate just doesn't even want to participate? First of all, they don't know who it is who is exerting the power that they see in the big splashy displays of signs at election campaign. They don't know where that money came from. They don't know who bought it. They don't know what they expect in exchange, or if they expect something in exchange. Secondly, they don't even know whether the things they're concerned with are going to be discussed in the legislature once the election is accomplished. They certainly don't know what the result of that discussion should be, and of course they shouldn't expect a foregone conclusion, because the legislature is the place for debate and discussion. But they don't understand anymore, and I don't understand anymore, just how it is that people end up being the decision makers, and they don't understand exactly which group of people, which level of government is engaged, is involved, is responsible for the things that mean the most to them in their area. You travel around this province and you will find that different areas have different priorities. We hear an awful lot about roads, we hear about potholes, but we also hear about health care. And you know, it would be nice if people understood that the pothole is in fact the responsibility of the municipal government, and the health care is the responsibility of the provincial government. They don't have to choose. They don't have to say, do I want a bed for my grandmother or do I want a pothole filled? They don't have to make that decision. We got 3 levels of government, and they all have different purviews. They all have different responsibilities, and it would be really nice if the people in this province could count on having had a decent civic education before they're asked to go to the polls. They've got to have that faith restored. So, I guess the thing to say, pardon me? How are we going to restore that faith in 6 months? Well, give people the chance to be a part of the process by which they set the rules. I was amazed, and I have been amazed every time I am involved with a residents' association by the savvy, the common sense and the savvy that people bring to decisions when they know it matters. They know. They ask, well, this happened. How did it happen? Why did it happen? This is going to happen. Well, then what do we have to do next? People are not children in this province. They have a tremendous amount of ability when they are allowed to exercise it. They are capable of figuring out just what kind of a process they think would be the best way to get the best result in terms of government and putting the right decision makers in place to make the meaningful decisions. They're capable of doing it, but we're not asking them. And I would be embarrassed to be a part of a group which imposes on the electorate a set of rules by year end, a set of rules that tells them exactly how, when, and what will be contributed to tailor the process by which their representatives are selected. So I hope that everybody in this chamber really thinks about the process by which they got here. If they feel that that process needs change, have they asked their electorate whether that process needs change and how it should be changed? It'd be a good chance to do it. It really would, because every single one of us at some point has been a member of the electorate, will be a member of the electorate. And you know, who really likes to have somebody take away from them their birthright? Okay? Sometimes I feel the watchword here has been penny wise and pound foolish. I've looked at decisions being made which are fine in the short term, or maybe fine in the short term. They solve a problem, but they often open up huge and gaping holes underneath. A number of the environmental decisions made in this province have had that characteristic, as well as have the decisions surrounding social assistance and just how we will deal with people who are, for one reason or another, often temporarily, out of the mainstream of the working population. How we deal with disabilities, whether in fact we do triage, whether in fact we ensure that triage is happening with disabilities, handle the problem before it gets really bad. And these decisions are the ones that need to be made in this chamber. The people who make these decisions are the people who should be trusted by the people of the province. And even more, the people who are in this chamber should be able to trust themselves to make those decisions. Throwing out each of these questions for infinite amounts of consultation and examination, and not necessarily execution, has become the watchword, and that in itself is also penny wise